Hi, welcome, and thanks for joining today's webinar from the National Pesticide Information Center. NPIC is formed through a cooperative agreement between the U.S. EPA and Oregon State University. I'm Amy Hallman. I'm the project coordinator here at NPIC. And before we get started today, I'd like to cover just a couple of quick logistical items. I'd like to invite you to please use the chat box to ask any questions during the webinar, and to please address those questions to the host, which is Sean Ross. It'll be a little bit more challenging if they're addressed to the speaker today, so please do address those to the host. After the brief presentation today, we'll address questions that we've seen in the chat box, and then we'll ask for any additional questions still using that same chat function. A recorded version of this webinar will be available soon on the NPIC website and on our YouTube channel. So for our presentation today, I'd like to introduce Alicia Leytem. Alicia has a master's in soil science from Oregon State University and is a senior pesticide specialist here at NPIC. Some of her past experience includes outdoor science education for kids and work for the USDA's National Clonal Germplasm Repository. Today, Alicia will be discussing NPIC's online portal for reporting ecological pesticide incidents. Welcome, Alicia.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, guys, thank you all for joining today. So let's get started. I'm going to just briefly go over what the topics are that we'll be covering today. If I can get this to work, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to start out by introducing NPIC in case you're unfamiliar with us and what we do here. Then we'll go into what a pesticide is, because that term actually may be a little bit broader than you're familiar with. And then we'll introduce the eco-portal itself, kind of the who, what, when, where, and why, including the required and optional data that you need to enter if you're going to put a case or submit a report into the portal. And then we'll go through an example incident where I'll actually go through step by step. We'll enter an incident together, and then, like Amy said, we'll have some options for questions at the end. I think I might take a little pause after I've gone into kind of what the eco-portal is before we start our incident example. So if you have questions at that point, we can address them then, kind of halfway through, and then we'll continue from there. So let me start out with, what is NPIC? So the National Pesticide Information Center, we are here to provide science-based information about pesticides in order to promote informed decision-making. Like Amy said, we're funded through a cooperative agreement between the U.S. EPA and Oregon State University, and NPIC has actually been housed here at OSU for the past 20 years. So when you call NPIC, the phone is answered right away by a pesticide specialist, and that way you don't have to go through any sort of manipulated phone jargon to get to who's going to answer your questions. And those specialists are highly trained and educated. So most of our pesticide specialists have master's degrees and come from diverse backgrounds, including chemistry, microbiology, soil science, mammal biology, environmental toxicology, and even food science. So when we get hired, we also go through extensive training on pesticides as well as risk communication. And because we have such a wide variety of specialists here with such a variety of backgrounds, it creates kind of a climate where we have this constant opportunity for teaching, learning, and sharing information. The basis of our job is to communicate science to the general public and other people who contact us. So we're translating that technical jargon around pesticides and risk into everyday language. So we do this primarily through personalized conversations using the individual in this one-on-one situation to kind of guide the resources and information we provide. So we have a 1-800 number. We're only open 4 hours a day currently, 8 a.m. to noon Pacific time, Monday through Friday. And during that time, we answer, a varied number of questions and calls that we receive. We do have several Spanish speakers on staff, so we're able to have that bilingual one-on-one conversation. And for anybody who speaks a different language, we do use Language Line, which allows us to accept calls in over 240 languages. So who is our audience? Primarily, it's the general public. I'd say about 90% of the calls that we receive are from the general public who are getting our phone number off of the back of pesticide product labels, or finding us on the internet, or getting their number from like a pest control operator who's going to provide a service and they want some further information that they don't feel comfortable answering. Those other 10% of the callers are some sort of professional, either pesticide manufacturers, veterinarians or physicians, health departments, or other government agencies. Most of the questions we get are about pesticide use in and around the home, though we do cover any other myriad of questions around pesticides, environmental risks, environmental fate, anything else. Each year we get about 11,000 inquiries. So inquiries include our phone calls, but also voicemail calls and emails, which is becoming a much more popular way to contact us and ask questions. Sometimes you can't have the same sort of back and forth through an email, so oftentimes if it's a very serious situation, we'll ask that emailer to call in and have a one-on-one conversation with a specialist. About 15% of our calls are pesticide incidents, and what we classify as a pesticide incident is when there's an adverse reaction to a pesticide exposure, an unintended exposure to a pesticide, or a misapplication of a pesticide. It does happen sometimes that people call with questions and we're not the best resource. So we have a lot of training on what other resources are out there and what kind of questions they can provide answers to. And we'll try and find, the best resource for that person so that they can get the help that they're looking for. We also have a website, which you're welcome to peruse. The URL is down there on the bottom. It has over 700 pages in English and Spanish. It's mostly geared towards the general public, though there are some more technical and professional pages available. Last year we had over 6 million page views, so it's becoming very popular for people to come and try and find that information on their own on the internet. And then sometimes if they can't get to the exact answer they're looking for, then that might be a follow-up question later on. They'll give us a call. On the website, in addition to web pages, we have resources such as fact sheets. We make a lot of videos, FAQ videos. We have a YouTube channel that we post those on, and they're also on our website. Along with, as Amy said, this webinar will be recorded and put onto our YouTube channel. And we also have outreach materials, infographics, FAQ comics, brochures, that sort of thing. And then we do have a presence on social media. We're trying to find all the ways to contact, a variety of audiences. And all of these resources we develop based off of the calls that we get. So we're trying to stay current with what are the pesticide topics that are important to people who are contacting us, and then develop those resources in response to that. Okay, so let's start with kind of what is a pesticide. We had a recent experience where we realized that a lot of people who go to our website are actually confused between the difference of the terms pest and pesticide, which was shocking to us a little bit. But the official EPA definition of a pesticide is any substance that is intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any pest. So if you want to take a second and think about what that might mean, what kind of products you would include in that list, I'm going to go through a couple examples. So the first one almost everybody thinks about when they hear pesticide is an insecticide, right? You think of insects as a pest. They're the most common pest for most people. And yes, of course, insecticides are pesticides, but they also include herbicides, right? In that situation, the weed or that plant that you don't want is the pest. And it can also include rodenticides. Obviously, rodents are commonly thought of as pests, and those baits or other, rodenticides are considered pesticides and go through registrations and review through the EPA. In addition to that, there are fungicides, so used for molds and mildews, as well as insect repellents. Those are registered with the EPA. And also antimicrobial products, so disinfectants and sanitizers. They have to go through the same risk evaluation and registration through both the federal and the state levels before they can be sold on the market. So when we say pesticide, it includes all of these plus a few more, but these are kind of the most common ones that I imagine you would be familiar with. Okay, so now let's go into what is the Eco-Portal. Now we know what a pesticide is. The Eco-Portal is a way to document adverse ecological effects from a known or suspected pesticide exposure to wildlife, plants, or bees. I should clarify, this is for non-agricultural, non-urban plants. Okay, and then this information is provided to the EPA, and that allows the EPA to take that information and use it in decision-making at the federal regulation of pesticides. Since it's an online reporting portal, it is available 24/7. So if it's a situation where you are an investigator or you work for an agency where you are already involved in these cases, this is a way to take those reports and provide it to the federal level as a surveillance. So this is a surveillance reporting system. It's not going to lead to any sort of targeted enforcement. So that's really important to know. So this is not a system to replace the state agencies. They have primacy over investigations when there are pesticide misuse cases or poisonings, and they should be involved in those situations. But this is a secondary place where you can report this so that the EPA gets an overview of what's happening nationally. So why would you report this? If it's not going to lead to any sort of investigatory, action, well, consider yourself, let's think about if you were an EPA risk assessor, okay? So you go to your office at the EPA building. You might work in a room very similar to this, and you're given the task of assessing a single active ingredient and looking at what the potential risks from the uses of that product are to people and the environment and the ecosystems where they might be used. So every 15 years, products go through a re-registration process where those active ingredients have to be reassessed, reviewed, before they can continue to be used on the market. And then adjustments will be made to pesticide label language to make any adjustments based on reports that have been submitted or situations that have occurred to reduce risks to people and the environment. So how does the EPA get that information? Well, one way is through the Eco Portal. So NPIC, we also maintain this information. We collect incidents when people call our hotline, and that information is provided to the EPA so that they have kind of a pulse on what's going on around the country. But the Eco Portal is another way to get direct information from people who are lucky enough to work in an environment that might look something like this and might have more opportunity to contact the wildlife and the organisms in those environments and see what that direct effect of pesticides are on those organisms. Right, so we're just trying to help provide that information from the people out in the field to the EPA directly to help potentially change regulatory actions in the future. Kind of get your voice or the investigators' voices or people out in the world involved in that risk assessment process so that those cases are known. Now, the Eco Portal originally got formed in 2009, and I think it's safe to say that every year we only get a handful of reports. It's not a common way right now for people to report, but we're hoping that by reintroducing this and doing another launch of the Eco Portal, we can increase those numbers. Because you can imagine if you were assessing an active ingredient, having one case or submission can be useful, but if you start seeing a trend across the country, then that can really help inform change. So who should be using it? Environmental state agencies, citizen scientists, and then, of course, professionals in fisheries and wildlife, conservationists, wildlife veterinarians, foresters, and possibly natural resource management. So people who are out in nature and can see these effects that are occurring. Okay, so when should a submission occur? Well, there has to be some sort of damage, illness, or death that has resulted to either wildlife, non-agricultural and non-urban plants, or bees, and have that effect occur from either the direct application, drift, or runoff of a known or suspected pesticide. You don't have to have it confirmed that a pesticide was involved. It might be a suspected pesticide situation, and if that's the case, you would just include all of those details into your report so that it's understood the information that you do have versus the information that you don't have. So all of these elements are involved in putting in the report, and then once you submit that report, the data is maintained both at NPIC, but also has an auto-generated report that is sent directly to the EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs. So because of that, NPIC doesn't review this data. We're not manipulating it or editing it before it gets sent to the EPA. But every quarter, so 4 times a year, and annually, we put together our incident data information for the EPA, and along with those reports, we're also including the reports that have come in through the Eco Portal and sending that off to them as well. And there's also in our annual reports some statistical summaries of the Eco Portal reports that we've received, for the submissions, and so you're welcome to also go see those. Anybody can find our annual reports on our website and see what kind of reports have been submitted in the past, what kind of organisms have been affected out in the wild, and from what active ingredients, if known. Okay, so now I'm going to briefly go over the kind of data that's going to be required if you're going to do a submission through the Eco Portal. There is some required elements. So here's the required information that you would need. Now when it says type of incident, this is talking about whether it's a terrestrial environment, aquatic environment, whether it involves just plants or just bees, or both terrestrial and aquatic, sorry. So there's 5 options there. You'll need to know the state and the county where it occurred, when the observance was made, details on the events, whether it was a use or a misuse situation, or if you don't know, identifying that, how the application occurred, aerial or ground application or unknown, the type of organisms that were impacted, and then the number and magnitude of organisms. So in this situation, if you found 1 dead boar, obviously that would be 1. If you found a family of animals, that could be many. If you found an area of trees that were injured, then you could say less than 1 acre, or more than 200, or thousands if there was insects, that sort of magnitude information. And then there's some optional data. So if the observed effects lasted for a period of time, you could put in the start and the end date of that time, what the weather conditions were, and then some information on the pesticide products. I'm going to go over briefly how to look at a pesticide label, where you would find that information if you're unfamiliar with pesticides. What kind of application details you have, so like the application rate, exactly how it was applied, some more additional organism details, the habitat it was found in, the route of exposure, the response to the exposure, and then how far the observed organism damage was from the treatment site. It could be in the same area, or it could have been down the road or downstream where the effect was seen. And then you have an option to also upload additional information, so any test results, etc. Okay, so here's a quick overview of a pesticide product label. This is obviously a made-up label, but I just want to point out some of the elements on here that are important if you're going to be reporting pesticide product information. So one of the first things is an EPA registration number, and you can find this on the label. It will always say EPA REGNO with a list of numbers and dashes. This is essentially a social security number for pesticides, and is very specific to that formulation. So like a social security number that's tied to an individual person, names can be used in multiple states for very different products. So you can think of like John Smith. There could be many John Smiths, but one individual person has one unique social security number. This product has one unique EPA registration number for that formulation. If you have that number, you don't really need any of this other information, because we can auto-populate that from the national or the federal database of pesticide products. But if you don't have that information, then the other things that can be useful are the product name. So in this case, Destroy WP insecticide. The active ingredients, which will always be listed as active ingredients, and I'll have those chemical names listed there. In this case, resmethrin and imidacloprid. And then the concentration of those ingredients in the product, where the product is meant to be used, and then the formulation of the product. Formulations can be a little tricky. This one says WP, which means wettable powder. But if you're not familiar, you can always call NPIC and ask what the formulation of a product is, and we can help figure that out for you. Okay, so that's pesticide product details. Some quick examples of potential reports that might be submitted. So situations like raptors who are eating poisoned rodents, rodenticides, and then experiencing a secondary poisoning situation. Possibly you're a forester working out in the forest, you come across an illegal grow operation with piles of pesticide products lying there, and also some dead animals like a dead raccoon or something nearby. You could report that. Maybe in a clear-cut situation, there was a recent spray after clear-cutting an area, and then an ill deer is found in that location, that sort of information, or a spill into a natural waterway, and after spills, if there's any ecological effects, fish kills or shellfish die-offs, anything like that could be reported. So I'm going to step next into an example incident that we're going to walk through each step in the Eco Portal and how you would enter it, and so you can get an idea of what it looks like. But I'll take 1 second. If anybody has questions right now on anything I've talked about already, then I'd be happy to answer those. So feel free to type them into the chat, directed to the host, and I'll give you 1 second to do so. Okay, it looks like right now there's no questions. So I will just continue on. All right, so here's our example, and this example is based off of an actual report that was received. I obviously changed details about it, but I'm going to walk through this. So in this example, we're going to assume that we work for the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and we received a report that there was a dead bald eagle found near a local fishing pond in somebody's home yard. So one of our conservation officers went out to the scene, and there was no obvious injuries to the eagle. It doesn't look like it was hit or shot or anything like that, and so poisoning is suspected. The carcass was then collected and shipped off to the National Forensics Lab. And through their lab studies and tests, they found that the bird had died due to ingestion of chlorofascinone. So then we got the local law enforcement also involved, the Pesticide Regulatory Agency, and they found that there had been a recent application of Rosol for prairie dog control in a nearby rangeland. So Rosol is a rodenticide that's used inside prairie dog holes and then covered up. And so we're not sure how that bird may have come into contact with it, but the law enforcement did determine that the pesticide applicator had followed all of the label directions, and the application was made according to that label. So we are able to get some product information from that applicator to apply to our report that we're going to go through now. So if you go to the NPIC Eco Portal, the website is on the top there. This is the front page you're going to see. There's a lot of information here, kind of what I've already talked about. But one thing I want to point out is there is an overview page here where it can list all of the optional and required data that will come up as you're going through the portal. And that can be a nice thing to kind of step through first before you enter some sort of submission, just so that you have an idea and you can double check that you have all the required data before you start your report. Okay, so we have that data. We're going to start our report here. Once you click, a little pop-up box comes up to let you know, that this isn't going to lead to an investigation. We're aware of that, so we'll just click OK. All right, so now we get to choose what kind of event this was, what type of incident. And as I said before, here's our options. We found the bird in a terrestrial setting, so we're going to click terrestrial. And then we get to put our state, and we're going to put Nebraska. You can see on the right side of the box here, these are required elements, so it won't let you move forward at all until you put in these required elements. What the county was, this is in Frontier County, and then we have to put in the date of the observed adverse effects. So this happened in July 17th, let's say. Okay, now we've reached some points where there's some optional data. You can put in whether the adverse effects had an end date and what the weather conditions were. I'm not including either of those because I don't have that information, but I am going to type into this box the details of the event. And so a lot of these boxes, when you hover over them, there will be a pop-up screen that comes up and lets you know what exactly you should be putting in there. So I'm going to have those pop up here too so you can see them. And then here's my entry. So Nebraska Conservation Officer NCO Marissa Pent, and this is a made-up name, recovered the carcass of a bald eagle. NCO Pent suspected the cause of death may have been poisoning. The eagle was transferred to the National Forensics Lab, who determined the cause of death to be poisoning by chlorofascinone. So here's a situation where if you put personal identifiable information into these boxes, into this text box, that information is not protected by NPIC. We do not go in and remove that information. All of this information in its entirety will be sent to the EPA. So if you do not want to include personal identifiable information, then you can just keep it out of that box. There's no reason to have to put names in there, but I wanted to show you that if you do put names, it will be included in the final report. Okay, so now we'll hit next. And this is the pesticide product information. We had gone through this pesticide registration number. We do have that number because, in this story, we've been in contact with the applicator. So we're going to enter that number into this box here. And then it's going to ask us, whether it was a ground or air application. These pellets are placed directly into the burrows in the ground. And was it a use or a misuse? Because there was an investigation involved here, we know this was a registered use, but you have the opportunity to put, if there was a misuse or a misapplication, was it an intentional misapplication? Was it unintentional? If you're not sure whether it was intentional or unintentional, you will just click misuse here. Or if it was a spill or an undetermined sort of application, we don't know how that application occurred. So we're going to click registered. This was a legal application. And now we get to put in our evidence that it was legal. So this is just, what information do you have to know whether it was a misuse or a use application? So I'm just adding in here essentially that rosal was applied properly by a licensed applicator following the label application guidelines. We're not sure, though, how exactly the eagle came into contact with the poison. And we're not sure either what the carcass cleanup schedule was from after the application. So with this specific prairie dog product, the label has very specific directions on applying the product, covering up the holes, and then 4 days after the application, the applicator has to return to the site and collect all of the dead carcasses off the surface, bury them a certain depth in the ground, and do that every 2 days for the next 2 weeks because of the potential risk for secondary poisoning is so high to wildlife. So I'm not sure what that, whether they were following that procedure, so I just added that in there. The use site, it was applied in a rangeland setting. And the formulation, so here's all those different possible formulations. This is a bait, so it's a granular product. So I'm going to click granular there. And then what was the application method? Well, this was applied by hand into the holes. And the application rate, according to the product label, is 53 grams per active burrow. Now, all of those are optional, information points, so you don't have to enter them if you don't know. We'll go on to the next page. So now it's asking about the organism that was impacted. So this was a bird. We had a bald eagle. You could choose, if there's insects, amphibians, reptiles. And now here's where it's going to ask about the number of organisms, so specific numbers, or if we just know the magnitude, we can enter the magnitude. We know that this was just a single bird incident, so we're just going to enter 1 in there. And now you can see all this optional information that populated very quickly. Species, I want to point out, this is actually asking for the common name of the species, not the species name. So the most specific common name you can think of. What the response was in this situation, the bird died, so we'll select mortality. The habitat in which the organism was found. So this isn't always the same application site. It was not found in the rangeland, though that is where the application occurred. The bird was actually found in a yard, so I'm just going to put home yard in there. And then the age of the affected organism. Now, we don't know the specific age, but we knew it was a mature adult. So that's what we enter. You're just trying to be as specific as possible. And then the route of exposure. So this one can be a little tricky. There's a possibility that the bird consumed the bait directly, and that could have killed it, or it may have been eating those carcasses of the prairie dogs, which would have been a secondary poisoning situation. But since we don't know which one it was, rather than put unknown, we do know it was an ingestion. So we'll select ingestion because that's the most specific we can be with the information that we have. And then how far away was it? Well, the yard was about half a mile away from the treated area. Okay, so now we're going to, this is our last entry screen. We're going to click this View and Review Report now. So you can see this just gives you an overview of the different sections. You can always go through here and edit. I want to point out one thing about the way the ecoportal has been updated. If you're going through an entry and something comes up and you have to get up and walk away from your computer, you get a phone call, there is no timeout on this screen. So you can leave it up for days and it'll just hold your information on there. But if you need to go back and edit something you've already entered, just step back, you'll want to go into this View and Review Report and then edit from there, because otherwise, if you hit the back button on your computer, it will pop you back out of the ecoportal back to the main page, and you'll have to re-enter all of that information again. So at this point, you can go through and edit things if you'd like to. I'll just scroll down. You can see all the information here. And then you can also add that optional information. So let's say we had a PDF of the lab reports from the forensics lab. We could browse, bring that up, or just enter additional information here. In this situation, because this is a fake report, I entered some information so that EPA knew this wasn't an actual report. Then you can go back and review that and just say submit report now. And you can see now it's been saved and sent off. So automatically sent to the Office of Pesticide Programs. They'll receive that report, and if you hit OK here, it just brings you back to that main page and you can start again. One thing I also forgot to mention is in that optional additional information, if you had a situation where there was multiple animals that had been exposed, say one animal died, so you enter that information in the primary information, but then there was also a sick animal found alongside it. You can enter that in that optional additional information with the details as much as you have without having to enter a whole new report, so that they'll still be linked because it's the same incident. Okay, so that is everything I have to go over. Here's the topics we've gone over again in case you want to look back at what we've talked about, if there's anything that you have questions about. We're going to go into a question moment now. I have here the contact information for NPIC. If you have questions about the Eco Portal or anything else, you're welcome to contact us anytime and ask. You can also send us an email if you have questions about the Eco Portal. Our email is listed there, and then there is the website again for the Eco Portal in case you want to go in and start submitting some reports. We thank you for everything that you do. We appreciate all the reports that people are submitting, and we hope to see more of them in the future. So I will open this up now in case anybody has any questions.
Please remember to use the chat function to ask any questions that you might have.
Yeah, so it looks like currently there aren't any questions. We'll give it a little bit of time in case anybody has any questions come up. But if you are going to head out, we thank you for joining us for this webinar, and feel free to contact us in the future if you have more questions. Okay, and we did get one question here. Is there a way to access submitted data, or is it only for the EPA? That's a good question. Yeah.
As far as I know, there isn't any way to access, oh, sorry, this is Amy. As far as I know, there isn't any way, it's not publicly accessible data. There are summaries provided at the end of the NPIC annual reports, if that's the kind of statistical information you're looking for. It does get into the types of animals and the types of pesticides, but as for the reports themselves, I'm not aware of them being available publicly. That might, certain entities may be able to request reports just like certain entities can request NPIC data, so EPA partners, state agencies, those kinds of individuals.
And one thing, I'm not sure if I said this earlier, but if you submit a report and then you later want to go back and update it, there is a possibility for us to update your report, but it's not possible really for us to pull your report and resubmit it back to you, if that makes sense. But we can add additional information as things occur and you want to update that. Thanks for the question. Okay, well, thank you all for joining.
Yeah, we'll stick around for a couple minutes, but if you don't have anything else, then thanks for joining us today and have a fantastic afternoon.